Good morning. Thanks for joining us. It's good to see some people piling in here, getting logged in, and we'll start here shortly. And for on our Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed webinar, we're excited about what we have to share today. It should be a good opportunity to give many of you an update on what we're doing with Ultigraz overall as we work with our customers to try and help improve what they're able to do with a combination fertilizer and herbicide together. So appreciate you making the effort to be here today to listen in. And this webinar is going to be exclusively focused on Ultigraz this morning. And so that'll be really the root of our discussion. We will have, if you're interested in going back and hearing one of the other webinars that we've done, we will have recordings available of those to share and email out to customers. So if you missed one of the earlier ones, we'll make those available. And if you have someone that has missed that, or you'd like them to hear that, reach out to your local rep, and we will put you in contact with that link. So we've had a good run here. This is our third webinar for the spring, and actually will be our final one, but we will have those recordings available, and should be a good opportunity to catch people up who may have missed that. So it's a little bit after 9. I think we're going to go ahead and start. And so again, thank you for being here today. We're going to do our Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed webinar here. Biggest theme today is One Pass, Better Grass. And so here on the call today, you have both myself. I'm Abe Smith, and I'm a territory manager of Eastern Nebraska and Iowa. I live in Kearney, Nebraska, and I've been working with Corteva for over 25 years, and the majority of that time has been in the range and pasture business, or working with these active ingredients, working with many of these products. And so we bring a wealth of knowledge between myself, Jordan, and Brant, who has been involved either in the Corteva Dow business for several years, or in Jordan's case, retail. Jordan will introduce himself in a second. Brant Mettler is not able to be with us today. He had a previous engagement that he was unable to be available for this, but Brant lives down in Sarcoxie, Missouri, covers southern Missouri as well as northern Arkansas. And he's been working with us over 10 years in that geography. And so he's done a very nice job. He's been one of the leaders in getting Ultigraz going, and he's done a really nice job growing that business in southern Missouri and even into Arkansas now as well. Jordan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good morning. Jordan Boone. I've been here since first part of April 2020, so almost 5 years coming on. But before that, I was in ag retail for 13 years. Spent a lot of that time with fertilizer, fertility, a lot of chemical in Southwest Missouri. So glad to be here.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to talk overall as we start here. Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed really is a different approach for many people. It has really improved the customer experience overall. And when we talk Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed, we are talking about the process of impregnating fertilizer of your choice. So whether it's urea or blends of fertilizer, we're impregnating that with either Duracor or Grazon Next primarily, and making that available to customers to be able to spread. But when we certify dealers as Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed dealers, we're doing it to a certain standard. We are certifying that process, and they're committing to work through that process in terms of limiting contamination potential, dedicating equipment in a lot of cases, or having clean-out procedures, and abiding by some of the rules for that. And then in that process, we will also list those customers as certified Ultigraz dealers and try and connect people that are interested. Locally, we have that on our Ultigraz website, so we can connect local customers more easily to customers that do provide Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed to them. So it's a select team of retailers that are committed to those processes. Really, the Ultigraz process has been an improvement in just an ease of application for many customers. And there are some major benefits in that it does broaden that application window overall. So it takes it out of that early spring window, a limit of usually a month or 2 months when things are really focused. It spreads that out, maybe opens that up a little bit earlier in the process. So depending on where you're at geographically, it might broaden that season and open that up 2 to 3 weeks earlier. Some of my customers in Iowa, they start that process the first week of April, which normally their spray season really isn't going to start until late April, if not the first part of May. So that should give you some sort of idea of what that benefit may be. And then we see less reliance on spray equipment, so you're not needing you're not held with limitations in terms of the amount of spray equipment that you have. We do have limited off-target movement concerns overall because it's impregnated on fertilizer. As far as that fertilizer spreads is the only potential for drift and volatility. And once it's impregnated on that granule, it doesn't come off either. So it also, there has been an increasing trend in terms of how the public perceives sprayers that run across pastures. This is kind of an invisible application for many people. When they see fertilizer spreaders, spinner wagons, or an applicator running in a field, they're not connecting that with a herbicide application. And so it does improve how people perceive what that customer may be doing, that they're not using herbicides on those fields. Not that we would be disingenuous in that, but I know in a couple situations that it has actually improved neighbor relations, as they're not spraying with boom sprayers anymore or large applicators, but the impregnation process and spreading fertilizer is a much more unseen application to them. Gives you some flexibility when your crop application starts, being able to impregnate fertilizer and load up spinner wagons or other application machines for customers, send those out. It's not tying up larger applicators. It opens up some of the time frames that you have overall. And then it gets your equipment out of the fields. Fertilizer equipment is really susceptible to damage on some of these rough or uneven pastures that a spinner wagon with flotation tires can really do well on. And even though there may be some issues with some of the terrain and some of the things that may be in that terrain, we still have some tire loss in some of those situations, but not having a large valuable piece of equipment down for an extended period of time really can be a benefit. And as you're dealing with maybe larger application equipment with booms and things like that, catch on a side hill, you can do significant damage on equipment really rather easily, unfortunately. So some of the expectations that we have as we think about the Ultigraz Pasture Weed and Feed retailer, we do annual business planning meetings with many of our customers that are enrolled in this program. It just gives us a chance to update our new technologies, any of the data that could enhance that. We are doing research around cleanout procedures for these some of the spreader, the application technology. So whether it's a spinner wagon, we continue to kind of work through that process of getting something that put together that, whether it's a power wash out or utilizing some different fertilizer, giving you the confidence that you're not going to have cross-contamination going to the next field. So we've been working through that process. I think we've got a good handle overall on what we can do for that, but we continue to try and finalize that process as well. We want to help you identify prospective customers for that next season. So sometimes that can come through that website or the referral process that we can help direct some of that. We can help do meetings and help generate some interest through that as well. We sure can review your current application, your current blending equipment. We've actually been able to help many customers, and Jordan will have some examples of this later on, of coming up with some unique ways to create your own custom blending equipment. If you have a large fertilizer blender you don't want to involve in this process, we want some dedicated equipment. So we, in some cases, been able to take a tender truck and repurpose that into a small blending unit that has been very effective. We've got some other ways that we've approached that as well. And then we can help align on communications. We can give you customized literature that will help promote Ultigraz with your logo on it, to be able to help spread that information to different customers and connect them to the location that may be doing that impregnation specifically. So with that, we're going to shift over just to some bigger topics here in 1 second about fertility and how we approach fertility. But the approach we take with the herbicides, generally speaking, we've sold a lot of Duracor here in the last 4 years with Ultigraz specifically because of its lower use rate per acre, usually 18 to 20 ounces of Duracor per acre versus a 32 to 34 Graze on Next HL, which as we were starting this process with Ultigraz or developing Ultigraz, what we were calling impregnated fertilizer at the time, DFI, we were using Graze on Next before we had Duracor. Going from a 32 ounce rate or a 34 ounce rate down to 20 ounce per acre rate of Duracor has been a big advantage in terms of getting a good blend and getting material that's dry enough to handle very well. Currently, our label expectations for Duracor or Graze on Next HL would be for 200 pounds of fertilizer per acre, but we are currently revising that, and we're trying to get to the point where we can have a 2EE label available that would allow us to decrease that minimum down to 150 pounds of fertilizer per acre, which may broaden the appeal a little bit more. There could be some challenges with that in terms of getting good coverage in certain pastures, but overall, especially in areas with lower rainfall or lower N requirements, just for productivity purposes, getting off that 200-pound fertilizer may be a real benefit long-term. So Jordan, I'm going to hand off to you and have you talk about fertility.
Yeah, thanks, Abe. So
one other comment. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom bar, or if it's on the top, use the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring that. So if you have questions that come up, please use the Q&A feature.
Yep, thanks, Abe. So I kind of wanted to go through maybe just a refresh or a very high level, just some fertility in our pastures, maybe some guidelines and some things that might be able to help steer some conversations with customers throughout the season. So the question I get a lot is, you guys are doing impregnated fertilizer, you're selling chemicals, but why do you care about fertilizer and fertility? And the big thing, yes, we care about selling herbicides, but fertility has a huge impact on our pasture health. And we tend to look, at the higher level of, overall, our herd health, herd performance, things like that, our pasture performance. So we look at that as a very, very big key part of our jobs. Another thing too is often, sometimes unfortunately we have to run some claims, and when there is herbicide damage suspected in a field, typically, or sometimes, that can be directly related to poor soil nutrition. I've seen it a lot early in the season with brome grass specifically when it's stressed out. You can have a little bit more symptomology on brome in those lower fertility environments. Kind of wanted to go through, fertility requirements by, our forage crops. So things, in our trade territory, like our Bermuda grass, fescues, our other cool season grasses, ryegrass. These are some of the basic forage requirements, by NP and K, our macronutrients that these crops will need. This is per ton of dry matter removal. Just kind of want to go through these. Looking at our nutrients in the soil, we do have them divided up by our macro and micronutrients. So our things like macronutrients are going to be, our nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, and magnesium. And then we have, our micronutrients, which are iron, manganese, copper, zinc, boron, chloride, and molybdenum. When we're talking to a lot of customers out in the field, and I did this for years, they'll come in and say, hey, we want a couple hundred pounds of 312 or, 920, 330, 1717, whatever their blender ratio they're given that they want. But a lot of them don't really look at what the crop needs or, forage needs or what they're actually getting in that 200 pounds of fertilizer. So that's a conversation I always tried to have with the customers, my producers out in the field. And then, we're talking about the list of ingredients in fertilizer, we want to look at, our first three, N, P, and K is, that's going to be the main one people go off of. But there's also some micronutrients and other macronutrients that we can, go through with those customers on some of our blends or our specific products. And one example of that I wanted to put out was just an example of Mosaic Companies, their Mez, which is a 1240, no potassium, got 10 pounds of sulfur and a pound of zinc in it. So here's just a list of, analysis of some of the commercial fertilizers available out there. Our nitrogen sources, urea, ammonium nitrate, Super U, ESN, and AMS can be used as a nitrogen source too. Our phosphorus sources, we have TSP, triple superphosphate, our MAP, DAP, and MES we can use for a phosphorus source as well. Things like, our potassium sources, potassium sulfate, potassium nitrate, and then potash. Me being from Southwest Missouri, I wanted to also mention poultry litter a little bit because oftentimes, poultry litter gets used in our neck of the woods, and I think there's been some misconceptions throughout the year, and I do not have anything against poultry litter, but in certain situations, you can run into trouble pretty quick if you get way too much phosphorus out there. So one misconception I have seen or heard out in the field is it's often thought of as being used as a nitrogen fertilizer source. It can be, yes, but studies have shown that typically you're somewhere in that 10 to 15% nitrogen that's in the poultry manure or the litter out there is actually available right then in the form of ammonium. The rest of it's all organic and needs to be mineralized before it's available to the plants. As mentioned, yes, there is a very high phosphorus level in litter, and I've seen some train wrecks out, before I came to Corteva when I was working in retail, where you get your phosphorus levels so high that you can bind up other nutrients. So I just kind of wanted to mention that and throw this chart out here of the different sources of poultry litter and typical nutrient content of those. We're talking about the availability of poultry litter. So this is all nutrients available in the first year. So we talked about the nitrogen, how that needs to be mineralized, and that can typically happen within 30 days to over a year or more for that process to occur. Our phosphorus, it's a pretty wide range, about 50 to 100% of that is available within the first year after application. Our potassium, somewhere around 80 to 90%. And then some of our micronutrients or other macros here, about 80%. And then micros, somewhere in that 80 to 100% range are available. So generally when talking about our pasture fertility, the first key thing I always want to address, if somebody has a problem or weeds out in the field they're trying to control, or asking a question of, if I want to spend my money on fertility or herbicide, what do I need to do? pH is the first thing I bring up and address because it is pretty much, it affects every other nutrient we put out there in the field and how those nutrients are utilized. One interesting thing about our pH is that scale on a soil test, it is, logarithmic. So a pH of 4 is 10 times more acidic than a soil with a pH of 5. It's 100 times more acidic than a soil with a pH of 6, and 1,000 times more acidic than a soil with a pH of 7. So we're talking about soil pH and our availability here. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this chart showing our different spectrum of pH ranges and the percentage of nutrients available at that certain pH. So they are controlled by our pH ranges. Here's another interesting picture. Soil pH can also affect, our root mass on plants, and that's based on, the amount of nutrients available. So we see here a pH of 6.5. Looks like a pretty healthy root system. We drop that down to a pH of 5.2 or 5.5. You can see those roots are really just not getting very deep in the ground and not able to, pull up as many nutrients in the soil as what that plant would need. Shift gears over to some of our other nutrients. So nitrogen. So nitrogen, is a gas. It's abundant in our atmosphere. However, it cannot be taken up by plants through the root system. So the plant available forms, we have a nitrogen. Nitrate is mobile in the soil profile. Plants use nitrogen to synthesize amino acids, proteins, and chlorophyll. And there are, stabilizers for our nitrates and ammoniums out there. I'm sure, you guys are aware of. Wanted to go through some of the nitrogen deficiency symptoms we typically see. So with a nitrogen deficiency, typically those plants are going to be, pale, yellowish green, not as dark green, like we like to see our grass. We have a lot of slow growth, stunted plants, spindly stalks on them. And if nitrogen's severe, our leaf margins on the grass, the tips of them can often die, called necrosis. Another thing I wanted to throw out to maybe look for is, if you guys are out in the crop world, you'll have the, nitrogen deficiency symptoms of the V in the top of the leaf that will pull, from the center of the leaf inward, and you'll have a kind of a V shape as that leaf's growing. So that's something to look towards in the year. If you suspect some nitrogen deficiency, it'll show the same in a grass crop as it does in corn. Phosphorus, its function in a plant. What we're looking at, it controls, cell division and enlargement, helps with our photosynthesis process, energy storage or transfer of energy in the plant to help it grow. That has some other functions with respiration, and it also helps promote our early root growth and seed formation. That's primarily the thing I've tried to explain is phosphorus is very important for our root health in plants. So some situations that we can get some susceptibility to phosphorus deficiency or see that symptomology a little more would be in colder soils, plants that have wet feet or compacted soils. And here's some, a picture of some phosphorus deficiency symptoms. So here's some grass, we have some slow and stunted growth on this, and our root system really isn't that abundant here. And with phosphorus, I wanted to ask, anybody seen this one? I get calls quite a bit asking how to, what herbicide is out there to control broom sedge. And broom sedge is a fertility issue. A common misconception has been that broom sedge is caused by a low pH. While that can be true, it is a double-edged sword because broom sedge, it thrives in low phosphorus environments. So you can have a soil test where your phosphorus is, optimum or fine, but the pH could be low, and that would actually be tying up your phosphorus availability in the field. Jumping over to potassium, the biggest thing with it is it improves water use efficiency. So I know, several years of drought has come on. I remember, back years and years ago, in retail back in 2012, we hit a really bad drought. And that's when a lot of people started really paying close attention to their nutrient levels in their soils. And we started doing a lot of variable rate or variable grid zone sampling to pastures and hay fields, and we would go out and variable rate spread those. But most of the time when all the grass would die out in these drought conditions, we saw a lot of potassium deficiency out there. So functions in the plant for potassium, opening and closing of the leaf pores, regulating, water, gas, heat inside those plants. It helps with our photosynthesis, our carbohydrate translocation throughout the plant, helps synthesize proteins and activate the enzymes within the plant, and helps control that ionic balance between the nutrients in it. Like we mentioned, some situations in the soil where we see potassium deficiencies, or some situations that would arise to really bring those out our dry soils. Obviously we talked about drought, wet soils too. In the springtime, those plants tend to bring up a lot of potassium and pull that out of the ground. Some of our sandier soils that don't hold on to those nutrients as well. And then, compacted soils, we're not getting as much nutrient uptake in those plants. So some other, potassium deficiency symptoms, slow growth, forage, it can be yellowing, a lighter pale color. Wanted to mention really dry leaves, and some leaves can fall off in alfalfa. And also with our grasses, what we can see with potassium deficiency, we mentioned the V in corn and grass with nitrogen. We also see that in our grasses and corn with potassium deficiencies, but it won't be, a V from the center of the stalk down towards the base of that leaf. It'll be, inverted along the leaf margins. So that kind of wraps it up for fertility, but I wanted to jump into, some of what we're bringing to the table with the value of weed control. I really like this infographic and like to throw it into any presentation or, talk we're given. So, before weed control, we typically see, reduced carrying capacities, not being able to stock those fields as heavy with mouths to feed as what we would with weed control. We're more reliant on purchased feed or, other forage sources. And what we do see is some spot grazing occurs, so we're not utilizing 100% of that available forage out there. Wanted to give some real life examples, utilizing our Ultigraz system. So here's some pictures in Grinnell, Iowa that Abe has provided for this. So, it isn't always, success isn't always visual. Residual control is effective. So with, Ultigraz, we do get a very high level of residual control. So, at the beginning of the year, whenever, this field here on the left was applied, typically you wouldn't, see weeds up this high. So go and apply it, and this just kind of shows the value of your residual weed control out there. And this picture on the right is the same field from a different angle, just illustrating that.
Yeah, the musk thistle, if you go back to the picture on the left there, Jordan, the musk thistle is an area that couldn't be treated with the boom. It's actually the backside of a pond dam. And so you can see they had a lot of musk thistle pressure there. And even though you might find further on the left side, you'd find a couple thistles out there because Ultigraz treatments are, we would set the bar 85, 90% control because you're dealing with fertilizer and things have to be taken up through the root system. It's not going to be as consistent maybe as what you might expect with a broadcast application. But it really stands out of the how we controlled musk thistle in that area with the treated fertilizer we call Ultigraz.
Yep. There's another side-by-side comparison I wanted to show up in Iowa still. So we're looking at 20 ounces of Duracor up there towards the top of the picture, treated, and down towards the bottom was just an untreated area. Here's some trials that I've done. Abe mentioned a while ago doing the lower use rate fertilizer. This is some trials I've done out near Hutch, west of the Flint Hills, where it tends to be a little bit more dry, less annual precipitation. So 200 pounds of fertilizer out in that part of the world sometimes just is doesn't do as much good. So we see another side-by-side picture. Obviously, we're not going to be treating roadsides or right of ways, but with Duracor and Ultigraz. But wanted to throw this picture out there too, that we can still see really, really great results with this program. And here's just a close-up picture we took years ago of some treated fertilizer getting put on the ground, what that might look like. This is a picture from kind of the very beginnings when they started looking at, this is before I came to Corteva, but looking at impregnating dry fertilizer with these herbicides and seeing what kind of control we could get. So this was in Texas way back in 2009 when this first started. This was Graze On Next at 32 ounces and 200 pounds of urea on a Bermuda field. And some of the responses we've seen by treating our forages with herbicides only, no fertilizer, fertilizer only, and then fertilizer with an herbicide. We see a pretty hefty increase, utilizing the system in forage response and tonnage on what we can get out of those fields. So if anybody's thinking about, just kind of starting out in this Ultigraz program or starting to impregnate fertilizer with your Duracor, this is kind of depends on how do you mix this product in. So in this picture here, up at the top left, you'll see that's the horizontal blender, and we do have some piping in there and some nozzles that will squirt out onto the fertilizer as that stuff is blending in there. Picture on the top right, stuck that in there because sometimes we like to, with certain retailers or customers, put in a blue dye. That way we can differentiate between equipment that has been utilized with these herbicides and fertilizer versus non-treated fertilizers with Ultigraz. And here's some examples of some of these blenders out in the field. So picture on the left here, we have a tote that's going into an inductor tank, where we can measure that out per, what that load of fertilizer is going for, and then pump it into the blender here on the right. It's kind of hard to see, but towards the center of that blender, you can see a nozzle sticking in there that will spray that herbicide onto the fertilizer to get blended. Some other examples with our vertical blenders. Hose in the top and eventually get covered. So what they do is make a manifold or an impregnator ring. That's what they call it. Like this picture here on the right, that actually has a hose to this little manifold here, and it has a whole bunch of nozzles kind of in a circular ring going in to treat this fertilizer as it's getting blended in that vertical blender. Some other options we have available, if putting a separate dedicated blender in the fertilizer shed isn't an option, and you don't think the volume's going to be so much to where tying up a blender or putting a separate blender in isn't really feasible financially. Here's another option for you. So we can actually go into a tender truck or a tender trailer and impregnate the herbicide into the auger as that fertilizer is coming up. I've got a video of that in a little bit to show you that it does work. I do have one retailer that on the side of their vertical blender on a clean out chute, they put another auger in to where they've put nozzles into that auger and just measure that flow of the herbicide onto the flow rate of the fertilizers that's coming out of that auger. So here we have a video just with some of the different parts that are on a tender truck in one of these setups. So there we have our tank. And here's what that can look like after it's been treated through an auger. And obviously at the very beginning, you're going to have some, some that isn't treated while that herbicide is getting pumped through the lines.
It takes a little bit of work to get it calibrated overall, but once you develop a process, and Jordan and I have helped customers do this, or we have our market development specialist, Jerome, has done a good job of helping people get these things calibrated to where they work very effectively and consistently. So once you start that process, you can kind of settle into a recommendation or two that works for you really well.
Correct. Don't hesitate if you're thinking about putting in an auger system into getting a hold of one of us, and we can definitely come help calibrate those. And then the fun one. This is always the 7:30 at night phone call. With the fertilizer, we can see some bridging problems, and it has typically been worse with our nitrate products, ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate over urea. Typically, what we know is that atmospheric moisture can affect the flowability of dry fertilizer. I've personally seen several times it varies from load to load, or even within a load. There's a lot of inconsistency with some of the ammonium nitrate sources that we get. Like we mentioned, the bridging tends to be worse with ammonium sulfate and ammonium nitrate versus urea. So the big key point, or one of the recommendations that we have is obviously not to let that fertilizer sit for an extended period of time. Once it's blended, if you're using ammonium nitrate or ammonium sulfate, get to the field as quick as you can to get it off. So with that we can open up to any questions you guys have, but just wanted to say thank you for joining. You're on mute, Abe.
Yeah, we don't have any questions right now in the queue, but please take a second. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A button there, and we would love to be able to answer that question for you. I have a feeling, if you have interest in this, please talk with your local rep, whether it's Jordan, myself, or Brant. We can sure talk to you about that. We can talk to you about becoming an Ultigraz certified retailer as well, and what that might look like for your organization specifically, and trying to work through this process of having a dedicated blending unit. It does have some hurdles with it overall, but it can be done. Jordan, Dustin had a question. Is oxygen a macronutrient in this situation as we think about fertility?
I don't know. I've never looked into oxygen. I've looked at nutrients.
Yeah, I've never really considered, I'm a little bit older, so back when I took fertility, they were still mining rocks by hand. But I think in the macronutrient sort of category, those 6 that Jordan listed there, NP and K being the first, iron, those major 6 ones would be kind of the list of macronutrients. Oxygen obviously is kind of included with water and a variety of other forms, but on a standalone, I don't know from a fertility aspect that it'd be considered a macronutrient. So how is new seeding affected by Duracor? Jordan, would you've dealt with that quite a bit. So new seeding, what do we seed before or after you have an application of Duracor?
New seeding. So do have some charts. Typically with new seeds or newer grass stands, we do want to see those grasses tiller or get established before applications. Otherwise, we can run into some issues with plant injury.
Yeah, but obviously, and the other aspect is that by doing an early season treatment of a Duracor and a impregnated fertilizer, our reseeding window after that is not that long. So depending on the seeding and the rate overall, maximum 45 days to put new seedings in after that. So 30 to 45 days would be the label language on that. And it can vary by some specific grasses out there. So do we have CCA credits available for this? No, we do not have CCA credits available for this, but you'd be welcome to self-report it. If you need any supporting documentation, please reach out to me at abe.smith@corteva.com. All right. With that, we want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, and be safe this week. We hope that you have a great early season for your pasture opportunities, and looking forward to a great 2025. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.